to the Pop Occulture Show. We're back. I'm Lilith Dorsey.
I'm Jason Winslade, and we are talking, guess what? Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice. We're not going to say it a third time, but I might sing MacArthur Park. I was thinking that would be a great extra, someone left cake out. So I have to start with this rumor, right? Which I was telling someone the other day that Michael Keaton was an intern for Mr. Rogers. And the rumor that I've heard is that he used to hide in the closet naked when Mr. Rogers got the sweater.
What?
Yes. I don't know if this is Pittsburgh urban legend or what, but I love this idea of, him possibly being almost typecast for Beetlejuice because he's this extreme weirdo.
Wow. That's almost as good as the Mr. Rogers was a zombie in Night of the Living Dead rumor.
He got around, Fred. That's where we're at.
So yeah, this is we're sort of reaching the end of 2024. We're in the holiday season, and
there's some kind of Père Noël back there. Okay,
Santa exploding somewhere, so we're kind of looking at the our favorites of the year. We started late October this year, so we didn't get a chance to talk about this movie, which came out in September after 40 something years waiting for a sequel. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on with it that is occult adjacent, if not fully related. And I found it fascinating as sort of a snapshot of in some ways Tim Burton's growth, if you will. It's a much more mature movie than the original movie, and I rewatched the original movie before I saw it. It's been quite a few years. I don't remember if I saw the original in the theater or not, or whether it was on VHS. But of course, it looms large in our Gen X memory of the perfect 80s, somewhat teen movie with horror and occult elements. But then rewatching it, I was kind of struck by how kind of thin it was. That we think of it as this classic, and it is, but there's not a lot to it. When you rewatch it, it's like, oh, this is kind of like silly and kind of throwaway. Like it didn't have some of the poignancy that Edward Scissorhands had, and it certainly didn't have the intensity of Sleepy Hollow, or when he was trying to suddenly become a serious director with Ed Wood, and then later on Big Fish. Never saw the Big Eyes movie. That was like his Oscar bait or something, and he didn't actually write that one. So yeah, Beetlejuice sort of it's this weird kind of, it has this weird place, and of course Addams Family, that's a whole other thing. But yeah, it kind of has this weird place in 80s cinematic history, and I watched it at the Alamo Drafthouse here in Chicago. What I loved about that was that they actually had in the intro beforehand, they instead of showing commercials like other movie theaters do, well, they showed old commercials. They showed the toys. So there was like the Beetlejuice toys and stuff for the cartoon, and like all this stuff that was like the merchandising for the original Beetlejuice movie was so bizarre.
It was. I loved it. I loved all of it, but I think you're right, because it's certainly of a time, when I think of it, it sort of fits in there with the other things that were happening around that time. And I think a lot of its strength, which is still also for this movie, is its sort of, meta intertextuality, right? Like we feel like we're in on these jokes, or we're in on these situations, and we have sort of views literally into the afterlife that we don't normally get. I know it's fantasy, but still, I think that the premise of it is that we're looking somewhere else that's always there, but we can't see it.
Yeah. It makes me think of it. Just the other day, I saw there was a reel that was something from one of Rachel Bloom's shows where the song like "No Ghost," where it was the scariest thing wasn't the creepy thing in chains, but the idea that there's nothing. So like, boo, there's no afterlife type of thing. But you know, because these scary creepy ghosts are actually comforting because it's proof of the afterlife, and without so much, you know, it's kind of scary. So Beetlejuice is kind of one of those things of like it's you know it's all about the afterlife, obviously, um, but yeah, there is this almost comfort in that there is actually something beyond death, and you know the thought of there being nothing is can be terrifying to some people. But
I don't know if that works for this because I feel like in this, the afterlife is so mundane. It almost reminded me of that Twilight Zone episode that we were talking about, you know, a few weeks back. You can search back in the episodes, everybody. But where there's that guy that's just going to work and he can't take it. Like that's what the afterlife looks like. You know, you've got Bob and then people standing in line forever. And like, so the afterlife ends up being more of this like droll, boring, day to day kind of thing that we thought maybe we could escape when we were dead, but you can't, right? Like you still have to take a number, you still have to sit there and wait till your number's called. You might have an office job, you know, like it still sucks.
yeah, bureaucracy, and even you know even the actor Willem Dafoe, who's an actor who has to become a real detective in the afterlife. So there's that. So yeah, totally. You're it does it parodies the after. And then there's a lot of you know depictions of hell that shows people standing in line and taking numbers. I've seen that in many things. Like I was just thinking, Good Omens is one of them. And how does one know that one is in the afterlife? Well, there's I guess there's a book involved. Why don't you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah, right. Like I said, I was going to read from the handbook for the recently deceased. And you asked me before we started, where did I get it? My goddaughter, Bass, had actually sent it to me, but I forgot she was going to send it to me. And it showed up a few weeks later. And I was starting to get really paranoid. I was like, is somebody trying to tell me something? Like, do I have like, I do have stalkers, but did they send me the handbook for the recently deceased? Getting ready. And I guess this is what, and that's what I love about the film that yes, it's so crazy and nutsy, but it does really deal with a lot of these, you know, psychic ghost hunter people that we've certainly become way more popular in the 30, 40 odd years since this film premiered. So there's this thing about like communing with ghosts, finding ghosts, helping them pass on. And this book is really just chock full of all of that kind of information. And in a strange way, it's actually, you know, I think pretty, you know, accepted practices for people who deal in that kind of thing, like, you know, speaking with the dead and stuff, which it's a joke, right? It came from the movie. Even in the beginning of the thing, I have to find it. It's got a copyright date of, wait a minute, can I find it? Obviously, I can't find the copyright page because that's where my life is. Okay. It's got a copyright date of 1602. Oh, no, 1620. The Mayflower landed on us. So I thought that was kind of entertaining, you know. And then it's got all of these things about like navigating the afterlife, you know, exercises for the deceased, creating, you know, do's and don'ts of being deceased. Do not attempt to re-enter the world prematurely. Do acknowledge and accept your death. Do utilize your handbook, right? So
I love that this is a thing like someone they actually wrote this and released this. It's like
oh
I'm
yeah,
wondering who the actual
definitely.
authors are.
Right? It's got a name, content JW. That's all it says. So,
Maybe I wrote it.
right? Right? Don't forget, time doesn't behave the same way. But I think that, again, anybody who's worked with the dead or who has people that are very close to them that have passed, I think a lot of these things are things that they've experienced sort of with connections with ghosts or the afterlife or things like that. And it's really interesting to me. You're right that they actually came up with, it's tiny type. It's, you know, what, 250 odd pages. Oh, look, there's little vouchers at the back that you can turn in. Present this voucher to your caseworker. So yeah, you can kind of look. I'm going to be able to skip the line when I get on this thing. Oh, and then there's a page of coming soon vouchers. So I guess when I get dead, those will come into existence, or as time goes on, they'll reissue more vouchers. It's hysterical.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember in the original movie, that was one of the first things I remember seeing that established the notion that if you were a ghost and you were exorcised, that was the worst thing that could happen to you. That it was death for ghosts. And that I remember at the time that seemed to be a new concept. Other things have picked up on it as well, but yeah, that you don't, exorcism is terrible. It's the worst thing you could ever do to something, So yeah,
It's beautiful. I mean, there's a lot in here too about non-intervention, which they kind of make that point in the movie too about, when he makes that portal between the worlds and everything. It's sort of like he leaves Bob there guarding it, and then everybody just sort of rushes through the portal like, I'm going back to the living. So there's this very fluid thing that, yes, there's rules. It comes in this giant book, but then there's going to be these certain moments when all rules are off and we can just do whatever we want to. And I think that that's another entertaining bit to the movie.
yeah, that's definitely a theme about rules, and because it's all about the contracts, like he signing the contract that if Beetlejuice helps Lydia, he'll marry her, or she'll marry him, and then there's like loopholes so there's like legal things of like, okay, she signed the contract, but the contract is now null and void because he broke this rule or whatever. So there's that the whole idea again of bureaucracy and legality in the afterlife.
And that reminds me too of a lot of those, Twilight Zone-esque movies from the 40s and 50s where you're dealing with the devil, but there's a loophole, right? And we grew up with that
Oh
all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
It's even in like Bugs Bunny, like, oh, here's the loophole. Da, 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 da,
yeah.
and he
Sign
pulls
the
it out of his
contract and
pocket.
play.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's,
what I found fascinating at the beginning of when we first saw the advertising for it was it showed one of the scenes, and I believe it's when you see it in context, it's Lydia talking to her audience on the show, which we should talk about her psychic show. But she refers to Beetlejuice as a trickster demon, and that phrase was not used in the original movie, and no one else calls him that, and he doesn't call himself that. And I think it's an interesting way to frame it because it does sort of put it into a context of folklore to a certain degree. And, so it kind of it makes it sort of historicizes in a way, or contextualizes Beetlejuice as a concept that hadn't quite been done yet. And I was
no,
really
I
excited
think it
about
works
that.
perfectly. I think it works really well, especially since, again, spoiler alert, when her daughter Astrid is having these interactions with the kid who's the murderer and has almost achieved, demon status for being this kid who murdered his parents and everything like that. So this logic of it takes a demon to fight another demon, right? Like, so even though he's this trickster demon, she has to call on him in order to really get help to save her daughter, right?
Yeah, I mean, with the whole sort of trickster mythos, there's that notion that they aren't good or evil, they're chaos, and you don't want to mess with them, and you don't want to deal with them if you don't have to, but they ultimately can be used for good ends, and that's kind of what we see. That Beetlejuice is almost a hero in some ways, especially when it comes to like dealing with you know asshole men. you know,
Yeah,
like
definitely.
with both Justin Theroux's character and the kid. And I remember when I was watching this, I was like, because this is just off of Jenna Ortega's run on Wednesday, which we'll be doing soon. Um, and so that the assumption that's, oh, it's Jenna Ortega and another Tim Burton role, it's going to be really similar. Well, the roles are very, very different, yet they both deal with the same kind of trope in the Wednesday show and the Beetlejuice movie of like the nice guy, uh, you know, potential love interest who turns out to be either just completely in it for himself or a manipulative narcissist or whatever. Like, of course, completely fictional. That never happens. Um, but but yeah, that seems to be that there seems to be this repetition there of that trope. Because like as soon as the kid, the kid's he's all nice and emo and he listens to good music, and he listens and he's kind. Evil, gotta be evil.
Yeah, gotta be, right? He's kind of cute too, right?
Yeah,
Like, must be evil, I tell you. But
yeah,
to me, I think that the similarities come from the fact that it's, to coin a phrase, like an Adams family property, right? Like, so we're still dealing with the Adams verse in that way. And that's how I read it. That it's the same actress in the same kind of, inspired Adams verse, but there's individual differences that we can see,
right.
but not the overall picture is very similar.
Well, yeah, that normal that normality that people desire is deceptive. I mean, I think that's a Tim Burton thing from the beginning. That that to look to the freakish for comfort, to look for the freakish to actually be the real supportive thing that you want, and not the normality thing, which that goes all the way back to well, the original Addams Family, of course, but well, the show and the Munsters, that the daughter who looks like the normal teenager is the scary one, right?
Yeah,
um
yeah. I mean, I think, and this is something I wanted to talk about. We've got Lydia Dietz, right? Like, and what are her quotes that everybody always says? I myself am strange and unusual, right? So for me, it fits into that '80s kind of iconic thing. It reminds me of Rachel True's "We Are the Weirdos, Mister," right? Like, I'm this outsider, I'm this goth, I'm this one that nobody likes, but I like myself and I can find my people even if they're in the other world, right? And or
yeah.
even if they're out there and I have to search for them. But I also have to be careful. You're right that they're not toxic narcissists that are
And
normy
that
and cute.
yeah, that's what I found interesting about the way that Burton wrote this. In that, like I say, it shows a kind of maturity in that Lydia is a really interesting character because she clearly knows that she's messed up, and she even is aware of how messed up her relationship is with Justin Theroux's character, that he's manipulating her and gaslighting her, but she knows that she she feels that she needs uh that kind of relationship, because she doesn't think she can handle it, life by herself. um but there are real complexities going on with her and her daughter. Even Lydia's relationship with Delia, her mother, played by Catherine O'Hara, classic,
There's a
um,
difference. You weren't very
is
nice.
more mature.
No, you
There's
barely
this,
acknowledged my
because
existence.
in the original
But
movie
we've
it's
done
just a
all right, haven't
throwaway
we?
of like, oh,
Yeah.
weird
Never
stepmother.
since.
There's not really a relationship going on there, but it clearly, as they've gotten older, they've developed a bond that is um, still unusual, but loving and respectful. Um, but yeah, it is very strange and unusual. So there's definitely this level of maturity going on in the writing and in the connections and the relationships that are like, her daughter doesn't want to accept who she is, and she even has this sort of famous persona because she's, this is what we should probably talk about, is that Lydia has a ghost hunter show, given her past and what she, and we see in the movie that I guess Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin's character have moved on off screen, like that sort of happened at some point. We don't know why. I mean, I think it was conveniently because they just didn't want them in the movie.
Yeah.
Didn't need them. But I think
No.
it's interesting that, yeah, because they were basically her parents. Like,
Right, right.
we see that Jeffrey Jones, we see that Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara's characters don't really have a lot of. I mean, they kind of tolerate Lydia, but they don't really have much of a thing for her. And it's really her connection with the ghosts. Like, they're the ones that are checking her homework and all this kind of stuff. This is what you see at the end of the first movie, but clearly that has evolved, and yeah, and so Catherine O'Hara's character has sort of taken on a more motherly role. And then, of course, we can't have Jeffrey Jones coming back because, you know, um, and it's funny, people forget that he's actually still alive, and he's not in jail either. He's just
Wow.
he served his sentence and he's out. But yeah, they didn't want to have any kind of, but they, for some reason, they wanted to have his character still be a presence. So there was like an animated thing, and then there was just a headless torso
Or
that's
so, yeah.
spurting blood everywhere, and like, you know. But he and Delia wind up together again at the end on the Soul Train. I don't know what you thought about the Soul Train, but
I love the Soul Train. I just came back from Cleveland and got to go to the Rock and Roll Museum, and they had the original Soul Train sign. So me and my friend Fat Mandy was doing a hard dancey second line in front of it.
the classic. We used to watch Soul Train all the time. It was so much more fun than
Yes.
American Bandstand.
I loved Soul Train. It's firmly embedded in my memory, and I still do those moves today. And I just love, and I love this whole concept of souls get on the Soul Train. Like I was
Yeah,
just watching that scene again before we started the show because I just love this. That there's this kind of soulful, funky movement that takes you from one place to another. And I'm also a big fan of dancing on the subway. I mean, I'm a New Yorker originally, so being on the subway and dancing is a thing. I did want to say though about the ghost show. I think it's interesting because it also for me sits in this liminal space, right? We've got Lydia. She really sees these things, but there's definitely a Hollywood hokey component to the show that's brought to the table, and I think that could be her fiance, or it could be the nature of what it is dealing with these people. But for me, it's like a critique of that kind of capitalism, exploitative thing connected to psychic energy. And I think that's not necessarily screaming at you, but it's definitely a subtlety that we can see when we're
yeah,
looking at those scenes.
yeah. It really makes me think about Lydia's character because like I said, she's a really odd character. I mean, especially with Winona Ryder being kind of odd herself these days,
Hmm.
where it's like,
These days.
I mean, she's hard to pin down as a
Yeah,
character because it does, like I said, it does seem like she's aware that she's not all there, but yet, is she's trying her best, and it's almost like it is that kind of thing of like someone who has accepted their mental illness and is living with it, but yet, yeah, that leaves her vulnerable to people like Justin Theroux's character. And like, again, it's that thing with Beetlejuice gives him a truth serum, uh, to so that she knows how he really feels. And so again, Beetlejuice has kind of saved her from these these asshole guys who are manipulating her. Of course, he's still haunting her at the end,
sure.
and she
Oh
can't
yeah,
get away.
definitely.
And that was like there's some creepy dreams there at the end.
That ending was intense.
It was almost
Ay,
getting
ay,
into real horror movie,
yeah.
material there.
Yeah,
And
yeah. It reminded me of Nightmare on Elm Street or something, right?
yeah,
Like
oh yeah,
asleep, she's like what's
especially with the
happening?
the baby Beetlejuice.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that was so creepy.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting though about her as a character. I was doing my homework for this class, for this workshop, whatever, online show, whatever we're doing here. But I did my homework, and the only thing I could find was a lot of young girls, not just at the time the first movie came out, but 20, 30 years later, still talking about how she was this iconic inspiration for them. She stands both as somebody who's vulnerable to all the things that we talked about, right? Like there's this whole recurring theme of missing parents or not being parented properly and those kinds of things that keep going back and forth. But then in the end, she's the one who can save everybody, right? Like she has to get her crap together and go out and do it. And I think that really is inspirational for a lot of young people. And that's what they see in her. Yes, maybe people think I'm weird. Maybe people think I'm silly or ineffectual because I see ghosts or I wear black or, my hair is funny or whatever. But I can rally around and do what needs to be done when, the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, and there's definitely this, especially in the first movie, there's this lesson about conformity, and that she at the end of the movie she becomes the first movie she becomes, you know, she's got the school uniform, and she's actually conforming to a certain degree, and there was this. I think for some people there was like, oh well, that she's sold out at the end, but it's like no, she's still dancing with her ghosts, but she's doing it at home, um, and it is learning how to actually adapt to society. And I also thought like unlike what could have been, like a I don't know, a gothic pixie dream girl thing, it's not defined by relationship, right? It's not
No.
she's not doing that for someone else. She's doing it for herself. Um, so there's definitely that element to, and then you see what again, her daughter is not a carbon copy of her. Her daughter is still sort of, she still isolates herself, and she still disconnects, but in her own way, and in a much more, I would argue, unhealthy way than her
Mm-hmm.
mother did, because she's not really connecting with anybody anybody or anything. At least Lydia connects to the ghosts, and so in a way, Astrid learns a lesson by connecting to the ghost boy who's gonna screw her over. But it's really all about, at that point, bringing her back to the family connection.
I just read it as that she had daddy issues because he wasn't there, and then she, despite her mother's talent for communicating with ghosts, she still couldn't communicate with him. So
Right.
it was like she had this person she was so close to, and now they're gone, and it's screw everybody because, the only person who cared about me is
Yeah.
gone. That's how I
Right.
read it.
And so through, well, yeah, so it's through the afterlife that she's able to, in a way, make peace with it. And I love that. But nobody's talked about him really. But I love that her father, Santiago Cabrera, who's
Yes.
one of my favorites from from the Picard show, from Three Musketeers, Heroes. I always like that actor. Um, so yeah, so let's talk about, what do you think about Monica Bellucci?
It's
That whole,
Monica Bellucci. Oh, that whole thing. Yes. Oh my gosh. I didn't realize that was her name. It's early. Uh, I thought that was fantastic. I want that to be my Mardi Gras costume. I'm going to put stitches on my head and go out as a vengeful demon eating souls. I posted, somebody had sent me something that, oh, here's some weirdness for you. And I was in the process of watching Beetlejuice. When it was first streaming, for some reason, the only way I could see it was with American Sign Language. So if you got to think of something that's really weird, like somebody signing all of Beetlejuice, and right when my friend had texted me about weird things, I was watching Beetlejuice in French with the American Sign Language, and they were talking about sucking blood and eating hearts and things like that. And I was like, whatever you got going on over there is not as weird as me watching Beetlejuice in French with American Sign Language talking about sucking hearts. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I think when you look at it, that storyline seemed to be somewhat undercooked, and didn't really ultimately seem relevant. But I think one of the reasons why it's there, other than providing like another antagonist, and a little bit of Beetlejuice's origin, um, but I think a lot of it, like as we were saying about the meta qualities, there is that, I mean, clearly something else is going on here in terms of what Tim Burton is paying homage to. The whole sequence of Michael Keaton just doing the thing, I don't know if that was it an Italian uh, or I couldn't tell if it was like Italian or Spanish or whatever. But so he's doing the whole sequence. It's in black and white, and he's like telling the story, and it's clearly like, it's meant to be a complete homage and tribute to classic European horror cinema, Italian cinema. It remind Even though obviously completely different culture, but it reminded me of when we talked about Coffin Joe, and the kind of quality of that kind of European horror. That's It's like very gory, but it's black and white, and so
Yeah,
it
I thought of
low
Fellini
budget.
or something, like this is where I was going with it. Yeah.
I mean, they really went all out. I mean, it showed them biting the heads off the chickens like that.
I
That
know. It's great.
that ain't PG. you know.
It was great. I thought, but again, this sort of trickster demon, I thought this was necessary for his trickster demon origin story, you know? And you're right, there's so much intertextuality here, there's so much borrowing from other things. And I think if you look at his work, it's always been that way to some extent, but he's allowed because of the fantasy nature of this vehicle to sort of bite into it even heavier.
So to speak.
Yeah, just like the heads off the chickens.
Yeah,
Ah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, very, very clearly, you know, and I think it wasn't. Didn't we? Wasn't there a thing where Tim Burton had there were pictures of Tim Burton hanging out with the Coffin Joe guy, like that there
Oh
was.
yeah, we talked about that a
Yeah,
little bit. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
clearly that was clearly an influence in a lot of
Yeah,
ways. So yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, it's bringing that. It's you know, it's kind of on the nose, but it's bringing that forward, and you know, that I think that was a lot of fun. I mean, I will never complain about seeing Monica Bellucci on a screen. I mean, she's still, you know, it's clear that maybe the story isn't complete yet, and that maybe there'll be a, you know, Beetlejuice. Um, sorry.
You just did it.
I
What is wrong with you? We had one
mean,
instruction. There was one rule for the show.
I mean, if they do that, then everybody's going to be evoking it if they say it. You know, they say the full title of the movie. So, so that's our take on the the demon host with the most, um, Mr. Beetle, Mr. Beetlejuice. I hear every time I see it.
I
Um,
liked it. I liked it. I did. I did. I love the musical numbers. I mean, you and I love a good musical number. And that production value for that MacArthur Park number. Holy
oh yeah.
moly.
At first,
That
I was like, "What is happening here?" And then it got, you know, it was like, "How far are they going to take this?" And then they took it about 10 steps further. I'm
yeah,
like, "Wow,
it went
they're really
off, man.
committing to this. They're really committing to
Yes.
this whole thing." So yeah, that was a lot of fun. So yeah, I really enjoyed it when I was in the theater. We enjoyed it. I hope you did too, and I hope you've enjoyed our shows for 2024. We've had, this is like what, our sixth episode of the year so far, but we
I
got
lost
much.
count.
Yeah, we got much coming for 2025. We got more vampires and witches and all kinds of things happening, for the new year. So be sure to join us and follow our Patreon at www.patreon.com/popcultureshow, where you'll see gems like we'll be talking about our favorites of the year, and how those things stacked up against each other. So stay tuned for that. Um, Otherwise, we'll see you next year.
Bye. Thank you.